So I wanted to do a little bit of overview of the spinal cord. Even though spinal cord is technically located in our spine, it is still a part of the brain. It's like a spinal brain in our bodies. It is made from similar tissue like the brain. It's got gray matter and white matter, and it is still a part of the central nervous system. So here is the spinal cord. Even though it's highlighted here in yellow, it's really not that yellow. It's more like this color of the brain. So here's the spinal cord. It begins at the foramen magnum of the skull. So as the brain exits the skull, the brainstem becomes the spinal cord. So spinal cord is an extension of the brainstem. Spinal cord traverses or travels through the vertebra of the spine. It's got the bodies of the vertebra and the discs in front of it, so anterior to it, and the spinous processes posterior to it. The spinal cord is also covered by meninges, the membranes that surround the spinal cord and the brain and have liquid called cerebrospinal fluid inside. And finally, the spinal cord has nerves that come from the spinal cord and connected to various body parts. These nerves are situated at every single vertebra of the spine. So however many vertebra we have, that's how many spinal nerves we're going to have. So to summarize this, the spinal cord is located inside the vertebral canal of the vertebra bones of the spinal column, and it connects at the brain to the brain at the foramen magnum, the opening in the skull, in the occipital bone of the skull. This is occipital bone. Here's another picture of the spinal cord. It takes the shape of the spine, so when we bend our spine, the spinal cord bends together with it. The spinal cord ends around here, and this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is the first lumbar vertebra. That's where it ends. This is kind of like the waist, so it ends just a little bit above the waist, so where the lower ribs end. And by the way, these are the spinal nerves. You can see some spinal nerves are longer than others. Some are pretty straight, some have lots of branches. Some are extremely long, they'll go into the legs or into the arms. Some are thicker, some are thinner. The spinal cord does not have the same thickness all the way through. It has some regions that are thicker than others. So if it goes through the neck, right at the base of the neck, it's got a thickening. It's called cervical enlargement. Then it gets a little bit thinner throughout the thoracic region, and at the end of the thoracic region, it gets the second enlargement called lumbar enlargement. These two areas is where the most nerves connect to the spinal cord. In the cervical enlargement, the arm nerves connect to the spinal cord, and at the lumbar enlargement, the leg nerves connect to the spinal cord. The leg nerves are bigger, so the lumbar enlargement is bigger than the cervical enlargement. The very tip end of the spinal cord is tapered, and it is called conus medullaris. When the spinal cord ends inside of the spinal column, right around L2 vertebra, the second lumbar vertebra, there are still going to be nerves that are coming from its lowest end, and before these nerves exit at the vertebra, they will travel through the spinal column and then exit at particular vertebra. So they form kind of like this bundle of nerves inside of the spinal column. It's called cauda equina. Cauda means tail, equina means equestrian. It's like the horse tail inside of the spinal column. This is a cross-section of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is sort of like, it's not perfectly round in a cross-section. It's got this like more of an oval shape. And this is going to be the front of the spinal cord. This is where the bodies of the vertebra will be located. This is the back of the spinal cord. This is where the spinous processes will be located. And inside of the spinal cord, you're going to find white matter and gray matter. The gray matter is going to be inside, more deep in a spinal cord, as opposed to the brain where gray matter is on the outside. It's called cerebral cortex. In a spinal cord, it's more inner, it's more deep to the white matter. It forms this kind of like letter H, and this is the midline of the spinal cord. It's got its right side and left side. This is gray matter, and it's surrounded by white matter. There is also a central canal inside of a spinal cord where cerebrospinal fluid circulates, called central canal, this little hole. The portions of the gray matter that form the kind of like horns, the ends of the letter H, they are called posterior horns, the smaller ones in the back, and the larger ones anterior horns in the front. The white matter is divided into columns. The back portions, posterior portions, are called posterior columns in the back of the posterior horns. On the side of the posterior and anterior horns, there is lateral columns. And in the front of the anterior horns, there are anterior columns. The folds that separate the posterior columns on the right and left side, this fold right here, is called posterior median sulcus. And a larger fold that separates the anterior columns, this one right here, is called anterior median fissure. Here's the cross-section of the spinal cord in different areas. This is going to be the cervical spinal cord, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. And this is showing the shape of the gray matter. This is going to be lots of gray matter in the cervical region, less gray matter in the thoracic region, a lot more gray matter in the lumbar region, and some gray matter, about the same amount, in the cervical and sacral region. Okay, so what I wanted to go over mainly is the spinal nerves. There's going to be 31 pairs of spinal nerves, and only one pair will exit between each of the adjacent vertebrae. Okay, so we're going to learn how to count them now. Okay. The spinal nerves are named just like the vertebra. They are given names C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, and C8 in a cervical region. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cervical nerves. Okay. The cervical nerves will form these networks, connections with each other. These networks of nerves are called plexuses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first 5 cervical nerves, form this network right here called cervical plexus. Next, spinal nerves are C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1, so first thoracic nerve. They form a network called brachial plexus. So it's going to be this network right here. It actually extends pretty far into the shoulder. Okay. Then we have thoracic nerves, T1, T2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's the same number of these nerves as the thoracic vertebra. We actually have only 7 cervical vertebra, but there's 8 cervical nerves. So that's the only difference. Thoracic vertebra, there's going to be 12 thoracic vertebra and 12 thoracic nerves. Most of them do not form plexuses, so T1 is involved in the brachial plexus, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are not involved in the plexuses. The next nerves are going to be L1, L2, L3, L4, L5. These are the lumbar nerves. T12, L1, L2, L3, L4 form a lumbar plexus. So this right here, it's actually a really long plexus, this crazy network. Then we have sacral nerves, S1, S2, S3, S4, S5. L4, L5, S1, S2, S3, S4, they form a sacral plexus. That's plexus right here. And then S5 is not involved in a plexus, and there's also one nerve called CO1. That's the coccygeal nerve 1.